Welcome to the Lead Change podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Mulcahey. I'm an orthopedic sports medicine surgeon with a huge interest in contributing to the growth and development of other leaders. On this podcast, we will share stories from many leaders in all medical specialties to understand the skills necessary to be an effective leader. We'll celebrate their success and hear about strategies to overcome hurdles. We will also highlight some of the unique challenges faced by women in medicine who are interested in pursuing leadership positions and the importance of mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship in achieving and being successful in those roles. Let's work together, build on shared experiences, learn from those before us, and use these lessons to propel us forward in our career. Let's lead change. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Lead Change podcast. I am so excited to have Janet Foutty on the podcast today. Janet is a nationally recognized technology and business leader who spent 33 years at Deloitte, culminating her career as CEO of Deloitte Consulting and executive chair of Deloitte US. During her tenure, she led the firm through significant transformation driven by technology, talent, and purpose. She's a best-selling co-author of Arrive and Thrive on women's leadership, and Janet remains focused on advancing innovation and impact. Her principal commitment today is to women's health, a mission she pursues through leadership roles with Women's Health Access Matters, which is known as WHAM, Amboy Street Ventures, and the Milken Institute Women's Health Initiatives, all aimed at addressing the historic underinvestment in research, innovation, and commercialization. So I met Janet at the Women in Medicine Summit in Chicago in September of this year. She gave a very inspiring talk entitled Arrive and Thrive, 7 Practices for Success in Navigating Leadership, which focuses on important lessons from her book. And we are going to dive into that in detail. Janet's the first author we've ever had on the podcast. I am so excited to have her here. I'm really looking forward to having her share many leadership lessons with our listeners. So Janet, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's funny, I did write a book along the way, but I don't usually define myself as an author. So I love that is the sort of interesting tidbit to pull through. So I'm delighted to share stories and have conversation with you about leadership, including the great privilege I've had to be an author.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I love that that's how I got to meet you. And I've read from 3/4 of the way through the book. I love it. And we're going to dive really into detail. And I'm just going to recommend this very highly to everyone. And we're going to talk about it, in multiple ways throughout this discussion. So Janet, currently though, you serve as the senior advisor for Women's Health Access Matters. So congratulations. That is incredible. Can you explain, though, to everyone listening what Women's Health Access Matters is and what responsibilities you have in your current role?
Yeah, so let me take a little bit of a step back. I did, as you shared in that very gracious bio, spend 33 years at Deloitte, and I finished that responsibility 2 years ago. As I was sorting out where do I want to spend this next chapter, I intended, for some people, when they finish a big job, they're super happy to sit on a board or two and play a lot of golf, and that is great for them. That is not where I was. I intended to, continue to lean in heavily professionally, and the place I've chosen to spend the bulk of my time is in and around women's health. And I've had the opportunity to do a really good, interesting set of things in the women's health space. And one of them is serving as a senior advisor to the incredible organization called WHAM. So WHAM, Women's Health Access Matters, is a not-for-profit which is really focused on how do we elevate the conversation and attention about where the disparities are in women's health, in particular, where the deltas both in R&D, research and development, are around women's health, as well as the deltas in investment. And it's all about making sure that everybody understands both the historical inequities, but also what the economic opportunity is if we spent more time and doubled down in and around investment and attention to women's health. So that's what WHAM is all about. I've been incredibly privileged to be working with the team there and helping them continue to refine their strategy. They really set sort of the foundation for this conversation over the last sets of years. And so they've been terrific to work with amongst a variety of women's health organizations I've been spending time with.
Yeah, and that's really fantastic. And I know much of your experience obviously comes from being involved very extensively in the business world, but these lessons translate absolutely to medicine. And I love that, there's such a focus on women's health and research and innovation. And in medicine and in orthopedics in particular and sports medicine, like that is a huge area of focus too, because many studies really highlight, outcomes in male patients or male athletes. And I think we're getting better at this, like better definitely in the past 5-10 years at highlighting and really clearly separating, the results and outcomes between men and women. But you raise a really important point, and again, those lessons are broadly applicable. And thankfully, we're realizing that even in orthopedics, and that gender and patient sex does impact outcomes.
Yeah, and by the way, I'd done some work in women's health over the course of my career, but it had not been my primary focus. What I've learned is that most of the work done in the scientific and medical community assumed that women were just small men. And we certainly understand that that is not the case, and we are different at the molecular level, and that there are things that are so fundamentally different about us that we need to make sure that women are well represented in the work of the research and development, in the science, and in the commercialization. So I appreciate sort of the lens with which you bring to that conversation as an orthopedist as well.
Yeah,
and maybe
that's
the
fantastic.
next conversation we have, we'll just talk about women's health.
Okay, yeah, perfect. We could talk about that for an hour, no problem. So in your role with WHAM, what are some of the leadership lessons that you've actually learned as serving as senior advisor?
It's interesting. I probably pull my leadership lessons back mostly from my time at Deloitte, that I've pulled through to the work that I have the opportunity to do now as I think about how to help shape the conversation around women's health. So there's a couple things that are sort of core tenets and principles that I learned about leadership along the way. One is that you absolutely want to show up every day as if the role that you're in is the role that you're going to do for the rest of your professional career. And that might sound like sort of a funny lens of things, because people are always like, okay, how can this job help me get to the next role? Or what can I learn here that I can apply next? And that 100%, of course, is important to think about what you're learning and what you're doing and how it can apply to what's next. But I've always taken the mindset that you show up, whether you are in an advisory role, a board role, a full-time role leading a business as a consultant, as if that is the thing that you're going to do for the rest of your career. Because what that does is it creates a level of investment and attention to the work and to the team that is really differentiated. Is it often what happens in the business community in particular, people are thinking about, oh, well, this is an interesting role, but it's going to lead to my next thing and my next thing. And I found that showing up and investing in the team as if it's the only thing you're going to do for the rest of your life is incredibly valuable in terms of building trust with the team and really creating a space where your team believes you'll walk over glass for them, and then they in turn do the same for you. So that would be one thing that I certainly learned in my time at Deloitte and is applied to the work that I'm doing across the myriad of organizations that I'm working with. The second thing I would say is that I have sort of a philosophy, and it's absolutely being proven true in my work with WHAM, that if I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm in the wrong room. So I never want to be the smartest person in the room. And by the way, that is almost never true. And if I've built a team and I'm with a group of people where I'm bringing the most to bear, that means that I'm not getting pushed on as a leader. That means that I'm not sort of growing and frankly pushing the agenda of the organization forward the way that we should be. So those are a couple. We could also spend a lot of time on each of sort of those dimensions, but those are a couple of things that I found to be true throughout my business career, and I'm absolutely finding to be true in the work that I'm doing today.
Yeah, I love that. That's tremendous advice. And, speaking to your first point a little bit about, treating that as if that's the position or role you're going to hold for the rest of your career, like that just shows, as you touched on, your commitment to that role, how you value it. And it kind of, for many listeners, you may have heard this too, Janet, kind of that idea of like grow where you are, right? Grow, like you want to give as much as you possibly can in that role to the rest of your team, to the initiatives you're involved in, to the company or practice you're working with. So you give a lot, they give a lot back, and then everybody benefits from that tremendously. And maybe, yes, someday another role, another opportunity is going to come out of that. But I love that you say you shouldn't be thinking about that next opportunity straight away, that you should be focused on where you are at that time.
And what I think that has led for me is actually to way more opportunities than I would have had, because I can see people I've observed over time who are in the role because they think it is a step to somewhere else. People can smell that a million miles away. They get that you are not as deeply invested in the work at hand. And so the ability to do that, I think, is really something that I'm not sure that I fully appreciated earlier in my career, and I came to really appreciate over the course of time.
Yeah, that is so great. And you learn so much as you go and grow and evolve throughout your career. And so that's why those lessons are so valuable. And it's great advice for you to share from all of the experience that you've had working at Deloitte and in these other roles. And also your point was fantastic about, never wanting to be the smartest person in the room, right? That's tremendous. I'm sure your goal as you approach these teams you've worked on, and as you're building new teams, is to surround yourself with smart, motivated, strong people. Right? And that elevates everyone.
Right? Different,
exactly. Diverse backgrounds, diverse opinions. Exactly. Fantastic. So you mentioned this, we touched on it in the bio, right? For over 30 years, you were a leader at Deloitte, and your career, again, culminated as being CEO of Deloitte Consulting and executive chair of Deloitte US. What were some of kind of the primary goals and commitments of Deloitte, just so everybody listening can understand that? And what did you do in your role as CEO of Deloitte Consulting and executive chair?
Okay, there's a lot in that. Let me try to unpack that a little bit. Deloitte is the largest professional services firm in the world, providing fundamentally three sets of services. Auditing services, so helping make sure that our capital markets have the very best data about the financial statements of public and private companies, but really public companies at its core. Tax services to help companies deal with the crazy complex tax code that exists in our country and around the globe. And consultative services, and that's the part of the business that I had responsibility for and that I worked in for most of my career, which is all about how to help clients solve their most complex issues, sometimes looking at their strategies, sometimes thinking about how do you really drive some substantive change enabled by technology. So at its sort of core, it's a services-centric business, helping companies be better, whether that's through accounting or whether that is through the use of strategy and technology. So sort of at its essence, that is what Deloitte is all about and the reason for being for the organization. For me in particular, in Deloitte Consulting, my career was all about how to use technology to help clients' organizations be better. And that is very much what I started doing for the first sort of half of my career. And then the second half of my career, I helped build the businesses for Deloitte that helped bring those services to bear writ large. So those were the things that I focused on. If I looked at sort of what were the threads that ran through my career, the first was certainly technology. And by the way, I'm not a technologist by background. I'm actually a quant by background. But when I started my career, the really interesting, complex problems in my clients were all about how do you use technology to solve these problems. So I quickly became a person who worked in and around technology, and that was a very important sort of through line through my career. I was always very focused on how do you both attract the best talent and how do you develop talent and encourage people to sort of have flourishing careers, whether that's at Deloitte or otherwise. Deloitte as a professional services firm is all about how do you have the best people who are motivated to keep growing and putting all of their energy into helping clients sort of solve their most complex problems. So that was a big sort of through line and important part of what I did. And then of course, how I helped Deloitte think about what businesses should we be in to be able to provide those services to our clients. So those are sort of the sets of things that I focused on, culminating in the opportunity to lead the firm. The thing that is So I talked about sort of technology and people being the same throughout all of that, but we talked a tiny bit about this earlier. But this idea of a service-centric mindset, I think, is something that was really unique and important for me over the course of my career. So I started serving clients, and so in its name is client service. My job was to help make sure my clients were wildly successful in their personal successes in the organization and in the businesses that they had responsibility for. So this idea of service was very sort of inbred in me. My job was to make my clients as wildly successful as possible. When I moved into leading, I tried to take that mindset and apply that to how I thought about the people within my own firm. And so traditionally, one might think about leadership as sitting at the top of a pyramid. And you've sort of made it to the top and you're sitting at the top and helping sort of direct people below. I really thought about leadership of exactly the inverse and flipping that pyramid upside down. And I was the person who was standing at the bottom doing whatever I could to hold the people on my team up and help them make sure that they had whatever they needed to be as successful as possible. So that sort of service mindset really transcended both from the first half of my career when I was serving my clients and helping them and their businesses be successful, to then my mindset in leading at Deloitte, which is doing everything I could to help make sure that my teams and my people were as successful as possible.
Yeah, that is really incredible. Thank you so much for giving that very broad and overview of Deloitte in general, what Deloitte does. I mean, I've heard the name Deloitte. Many people have, I'm sure, but I had no idea that level of detail. That's incredible. All the things that the company
it's certainly
does.
Not a consumer brand.
Right.
It's not a
All the
consumer
areas
brand.
of
So if you're not living
Right. We live in our little medical bubble.
Know.
Right. So no, I didn't know any of that. I really appreciate you sharing those details, and I think it's so interesting and really profound, kind of how you took the lessons from roughly the first half of your career, transitioned that to your role in leadership in the second half of your career at Deloitte, and just flipped that pyramid, as you said. And that's incredible. I think that's a tremendous skill as a leader to say, no, I'm not at the top, I'm at the bottom, and my job, my goal is to hold all of you up and support all of you. And that is really tremendous. And I'm sure everyone on your teams loved that, appreciated it, they learned from you, and so that's a really valuable skill, and I love that you shared that advice. So thank you so much. I do want to shift gears a little bit. I wanted to set the foundation with what you've done at Deloitte and your current, involvement and role with WHAM, but really transition a bit to talking about your book, which again, I'm absolutely loving reading this and can't wait to finish the last quarter of it. But so this incredible additional role you've had in how I met you, right, at the Women in Medicine Summit, is being a co-author of the book Arrive and Thrive. And as I've mentioned, I've read the majority of it, but I'm loving every word, honestly. What was your goal in writing the book, right? And who really were you targeting? And what was your target audience as you were putting this together?
So as I was joking in the introduction, I don't think of myself as an author per se. Now, this book is a couple years old, though I still have found that people find it, quite relevant today because a lot of these lessons sort of transcend time. But when I was on this sort of circuit, when the book first came out, I would always say I didn't intend to be an author. And then I started listening and I heard every author says that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, no, but really that was true about me. I did not intend to become an author. But the opportunity presented myself for my co-authors and I, who were extraordinary leaders, a university president in Lynn Perry Wooten and Susan McKenta Brady, who is a leadership coach. We had the opportunity, and it was presented to us, to write a book on women's leadership. And I will tell you, the first time the three of us sat down, we're like, is what the world really needs is another book on women's leadership? And we thought, we're not sure that that's really true. Well, we still got pushed a little bit by people saying you have something unique to say. And we did decide, I don't think any of us would have spent the time on this if we didn't feel that we had something unique to say. And the essence of what we had unique to say was, there's so much written and talked about how to get there, how to get to leadership. And what we said we wanted to focus on is not how do you get there, but how do you really thrive once you are there? And that is thrive professionally and personally. So that was the essence of the book. The other important thing about the book, as you've seen from reading it, first of all, when you have 3 co-authors, you're going to get a variety of perspectives. You're going to get an academic perspective, you're going to get a coaching perspective, and you're going to get an executive position and perspective, and that was mine that I brought to bear. We also had a lot of research that underpinned a bunch of the book, and we interviewed a really broad set of other leaders to get their perspectives and stories. So it's this good, interesting mix of storytelling from us and from others, academic research, and tools and frameworks. So we felt good about that. When we first set out, we really intended it to be for women, though we got some pushback saying that a lot of this is equally relevant for men, but for people who are taking their first big leadership job. And that was, we would tend to think about people sort of pretty far along in their career who are taking their first, in business, using, role as a head of a business unit, in academic medicine, maybe arriving to be a department chair or to head a hospital. What we found, though, when we were out and about talking about it, was it really resonated even with people taking their very first leadership job, which could be for people, a year or 2 into their career, where you have summer interns in the business community. Well, I don't want to speak to the medical community, but you have, your sort of first set of interns as well that you are supervising, or residents that you're supervising. And so what we found was, interestingly, we are all in the process of arriving. And then once you arrive, you have to sort of refigure out how to thrive in this next chapter. So what we found is that it resonated for people who were going through lots of leadership transitions over the course of their career, not just sort of in one moment of this sort of, ta-da, you've arrived, now what do you do to thrive? I think the team is actually thinking about how do you write a version of this book for much younger women as well, because I've actually done talks on college campuses, and we've thought about okay, so you're leading an extracurricular on campus, you're a leader in your sorority, you're leading a case group in a class. How do you take all these things about leadership and apply them to the different ways that people lead? But it was originally intended for very senior executives, and I still think it is sort of geared towards people who have, launched their career into their first leadership role.
I definitely think the lessons from the book are broadly applicable in terms of level in your career, profession, right? I see these lessons 100% are applicable to positions in medicine. I see that in business, but I think very, very broadly applicable.
It was fun to, I did a tailored version of my conversation for the Women in Medicine Conference. For those of you who don't know, the Women in Medicine is a fantastic organization led by Shikha Jain, and I was like, okay, how do I think about how this would apply to physicians and nurses? And it was really fun to think about how to apply the work that we had written for a much broader audience to the medical community. So
yeah, it's amazing. And just so everybody has seen this, right? So I have the book literally right here. Okay, it is amazing. And to show you, look, I'm about 3/4 of the way through. But it is fantastic. But I do want to touch on some of the details of the book. So first, just so everybody hears this. So the book highlights 7 practices for women navigating leadership. The practices include investing in your best self, embracing authenticity, cultivating courage, fostering resilience, inspiring a bold vision, creating a healthy team environment, and commitment to the work of an inclusive leader. It covers a lot of really important and helpful areas, but these are really incredibly valuable lessons that are mentioned throughout this book. So, Janet, I wish we could talk in detail about every aspect of it. Obviously, we don't have enough time to do that, but I want to focus on a few of the practices so we can expand a bit on these.
Great.
Now, from your perspective, what are some key points that you can highlight for our listeners related to investing in your best self?
Mm-hmm. So investing in your best self, I talked about my co-authors, and I would tell you that chapter was one that probably pushed my own thinking more than any others. Because I was someone who actually thought I was pretty good at investing in my best self, but I had a very, very narrow definition of that. I thought of myself who was someone who was good at knowing the things that were really important to me. So for me, obviously, being really successful professionally, very important, and learning and growing to that end. Being a mom, super important to me. Being a great being a great daughter and sister and wife, really important to me, and then how I focus on my own physical well-being and fitness. And I was good about setting boundaries around those and prioritizing those. And we write quite about that in the book, is understanding those things that give you energy. And I was always really good at that. What my co-authors really pushed me on was being much more introspective about the things that mattered to you, and really knowing yourself and how you sort of think of yourself both as a human and as a leader. And I will tell you that introspection would not be in my DNA. I'm the type of person that thinks like, oh, if you're sitting back and sort of thinking about what matters to you and you're not sort of moving one foot in front of another, like any time spent pausing is time wasted. And so they really pushed me to think about that in a very different way. And I'm still very much a learner, and this is a place where I'm continuing to learn and grow in how I invest in my best self in the lens of really being introspective. So for me, that has been a really important learning. And part of the process of writing this book was actually learning from others along the way as well. The last thing I would say about this sort of part of the conversation is it's been incredibly valuable to me as I've gone through a big career change in being the same place for so long and trying to take some of the lessons and tools in the book about how do you know what matters to you? How do you create the time and space for how you think about what's important to you beyond sort of the rudimentary basic things? So I found I've actually been using some of the lessons from the book myself in this current chapter.
Yeah, I think that that's so important. I love like your comment about, if you're not moving, if you sort of pause to reflect, like, are you actually doing anything? I think that probably many of us feel that way, like, is that valuable? But I love how you highlight how valuable it is, like how much you can learn about yourself, how you can think about your goals too, and that you've learned yourself in doing this practice and in writing the book, how important and valuable that sort of practice can be.
And it's certainly well understood that those leaders that understand who they are, what their strengths are, what matters to them, are much stronger leaders, right? We know that.
And it's not a lot of time, right? A few minutes here or there, but just devoting that time to reflection.
But however that works for you, right? Which could be very different for each of us.
Right, absolutely. And in the book, actually, and you touch on this a little bit about how each of you actually provide some commentary in the different chapters, and then you bring research in, etc. But in this particular section, you specifically actually speak about business chemistry, right? Which is the system that was created by Deloitte as a way to identify meaningful differences between people's working styles. For all of us, right, what are the components of this tool and how is it helpful to encourage people to invest in their best selves?
Yeah. So it's funny because each of us did bring some of our favorite tools to bear, and, all of us have taken 1,000 personality tests and they all have goodness in them, but this is the one along the way that I felt, well, first of all, it is very rooted in a lot of research, which I'm not going to talk articulately enough about to pitch it, but just know it's rooted in research. And essentially, it's a series of questions that help assess what sort of your balance of your personality is across 4 key dimensions. Let's see if I can get these right. They are driver, pioneer, integrator, and guardian. And so each of us has some of each of those things in them. But what this tool does is help you understand where each of your characteristics, and I'll talk to you a little about my own journey are. And so you both learn about yourself and how other people see you based on what your business chemistry is. But also really importantly, if you do this with a team, and we would do this with our clients as well as with our own people, and let's say you, Mary, are a guardian driver, and I am a pioneer integrator. What the tool tells you is, okay, if you have a complex issue to discuss between the two of us, here's some ways with which Mary might be approaching this and ways with which you might be approaching this, and here's how you might use some language to help the conversation go more smoothly. And so it's really good not only at understanding yourself and what your strengths are, but how you can relate to people who might be the same as you or different than you. For me, it was interesting. I took this assessment not super early in my career, probably at the midpoint of my career. And it was interesting. I was a third of three of the attributes and almost none of the fourth. I was a third pioneer, a third integrator, and a third driver. And then I had almost no guardian. And by the way, my husband is like a 90% guardian. So, it's
so you're a good match. You're a good match.
We're a good match, right? And so I was like, that's what I am. It made sense to me. When I transitioned in to take the role as the chair of the firm, I was working with a group and we all retook the test. And I was like, and I'd taken it multiple times and mine was always the same. And something really interesting happened is mine changed. And you think about chemistry is chemistry. You know better than I do, Mary. And I took it and my driver, so you all can imagine what a driver is, went way down. And I was so mad. I called the people that built the test and I'm like, wait, this must be wrong. I took it again. My driver was still down there like, no, Janet, actually, if you take a big change in responsibility and you're really thinking about the world a different way, I couldn't be the driver at the same level that I had been over the course of my career. So that was also a really important point for me to realize that the way I was showing up was different. And that's probably was a very good thing, but the way I was showing up was different. So that was a really reflective moment for me as well. So I don't mean this to sort of be an advertisement for the tool, but if you're interested in learning more, it's on Deloitte.com. You can go check it out. There's a book, a great book that's written called Business Chemistry. And I found it the best tool for both understanding yourself as you relate to others, which is a really important part of investing in your best self.
Yeah, for sure. And being an effective leader, right? Understanding those around you, understanding what their kind of personality type is, how you can all work together. But, all excellent points that you made. But one thing that I love the most is how you said that this changes, right? It can change depending on your role. And you saw that directly, like as you assumed a more leadership role, how your business chemistry changed. So that is a fantastic point and so critical for everyone to take away, that this kind of can evolve throughout your career, throughout your practice in medicine.
100%.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the second practice that is highlighted in this book is embracing authenticity. So how would you, Janet, define authenticity?
So let me start by saying that when I started my career, the word authenticity was not in the conversation. I cannot emphasize how much that was not in the conversation. As a matter of fact, it was the inverse. It was, how do you show up as consistently as possible with all the people around you? To me, authenticity is showing up a way that feels natural and comfortable to you, for the setting that you are in. So it's been interesting. So we went as a sort of culture from, you do not want to be authentic. You want to be as the same as possible, certainly in the business community. I think that's probably true in the medical community as well. To this conversation about authenticity, but also figuring out, how do you show up authentically that's appropriate for the situation that you're in, and where that sort of frame that you still want to sit within to show up authentically. So it's being comfortable and confident might be very different at a weekend barbecue with your family than it would be showing up in a professional setting, on a podcast, in a room with a patient. So it is about looking for those dimensions of yourself that make you who you are and make you comfortable and confident, tailored for the settings that you're in. So that's how I think about authenticity.
Yeah. And that's fantastic. And I think it is possible, as you're saying, it is possible to be yourself, to show up as yourself, to whether that's in how you dress and how you carry yourself and how you act and how you speak. It is possible
the things
to
you
do
talk
that
about.
Right. In every setting, but critically, as you mentioned, that you do have to take into account the setting, that it matters, right? 100% it matters how you need to carry yourself in a professional setting versus more relaxed setting at a weekend barbecue. So super duper important to keep that in mind. In the book, also, you mentioned specifically that one of your leadership principles is how you do anything is how you do everything. I think that's really incredibly profound, but tell us, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So it's funny because I didn't learn this expression until later in my career. I was interviewing someone live in a setting when we were not doing as much on camera and on Zoom. And he was someone who lived in the world of sports. And he was actually talking about one of his players. And he used this expression talking about how his players showed up in everything from practice to time spent in the community to time spent in a game. And this was in professional sports. And I had this absolute sort of aha Shazam moment that this is something that had always mattered to me, and he had just encapsulated it so well. Now, by the way, when you go back and look at the origin of this phrase, it's not attributable to him, even though I attributed to him for many years. It's either, the ancient Greeks, or there's also a guy who does those sort of posters that they used to put up in offices in the 80s and 90s for feel-good posters. So yeah. I don't really know what the origin is, but for me, what this expression means is the consistency with which you show up. And I always think about the conversation that you have with administrative assistant and your interest in them and their life versus someone on your team who is a senior person versus a client shows sort of the true stripes of who you are. The level of preparedness you have for a conversation that you're going to have with someone. So many examples of the consistency with which you show up demonstrates who you are as a person. So I love the expression of how you do anything is how you do everything, because to me, it is about the time and attention you take no matter who you're interacting with or what the topic is. Now, by the way, there's things where I can spend less time preparing because I know the topic really well. So I'm not saying that I would spend, the same amount of time preparing, but the consistency with which I show up, I think says a lot about who we are as humans and who we are as leaders. So that is something that I've held very dear. And I love that you picked that expression out of this entire book, because that is something that I feel so strongly about. And it's a standard I really try to hold myself to. Now, do I slip on that on occasion? I do, but I know when I do it, and I work really hard to course correct when I do that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I when I read that quote, it was so impactful. And I hope that everybody listening feels that way too, because you read it and you say wow, that's really powerful. It's really meaningful. And what you added to that is to say, it's the consistency in how you show up. Right. And that is so important. It's fantastic. Not just when you're presenting to a board at Deloitte or when I'm, doing a surgery, how you're interacting with your team, but in every single interaction, like you said, to the secretary, to the staff, to the janitors, to your department chair, to everyone, that you should have some consistency in how you're showing up.
And it obviously, that to me is the heart of authenticity, because if you show up different ways in different settings for different audiences, people see that, and that undermines your authenticity. If you want to show up as an authentic leader who is who they are, that means you don't turn on the charm or the attention or the focus or the preparedness different in one setting than another.
And I think without that consistency, right, nobody knows what to expect. They were like, oh, well, you're in this setting. We don't know what to expect. But yeah, that.
Okay, so I love that. I had not thought about that. I love that point, right? And we certainly know, and we've all experienced leaders where you don't know who you're going to get on any given day. So I always think of it as with different groups of people and in different settings, but I love that idea of consistency with your own team. And as a leader, evenness matters. Evenness matters. That's it. I love that point. I'm going to pull that through in my own thinking as well. So thank you for that.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. But really, really fantastic. Love that you brought that up in the book. In that section also on authenticity, there's a discussion of executive presence. Okay. And it's interesting because so I'm participating in a year-long leadership program right now, and that was a topic that was discussed. So I really love that this point came up. But you comment specifically that you were told throughout your career that you needed to work on your executive presence without ever receiving any suggestions on how to do that, right? So can you explain to us, for everyone listening, what does executive presence mean, and what are some ways that we can all optimize kind of how we show up, how our personal executive presence?
So it was interesting, writing a book with co-authors, I wouldn't say we always had automatic agreement, but this is a place where we actually had some really interesting and healthy discussion and debate, and I felt very strongly about how this conversation was reflected. And I'm actually I'm going to twist your question a little bit here, because I believe that the words executive presence is code for showing up the way that, in the business community, that I'll just be really simplistic, that white men have showed up for decades. And that when someone says you need to work on your executive presence, it means you're not like the archetype of what we think an executive looks like. So I went on this crazy campaign when I had the privilege, I was sitting in these, very elevated seats to try to actually eliminate that language, because I believe that language was often shorthand for you don't look the type, you don't act the type, you don't sound the type. And so if someone got feedback in and around you don't have executive presence, I would tell people getting the feedback, you go back and you ask really, really detailed questions and examples of how I could change how I show up to appear more as an executive. And people giving feedback, I would tell them, first of all, I don't think you should use that language at all because it is so generic. If you're going to use it, you need to have 3 to 5 examples of what someone could do differently to show up. Because at its core, being a great executive and having executive presence is doing a few things really well. It is communicating clearly to your audience. It is listening really well. It is being able to be relatable, accessible. That's what having great executive presence is about, is being someone who is credible and trusted in the situations that they're in. And that's everywhere from presenting in front of thousands of people to around a boardroom table to in a one-on-one conversation. And so I'm on a mission to say, if we're going to use these words, let's get really specific and really clear about what we mean, because we know the things I talked about, how you are credible, how you are relatable, how you listen, how you connect dots, all those things that great executives need to do. That does not show up in one physical embodiment of whoever's ideas of what a traditional executive looks like. So I'm on a mission to really change that conversation. So thank you for letting me lean into that, because I'm impassioned that we need to change the language about that. I'm not kidding myself. I don't think we're going to change that language just by me being on a tear about it. But for anyone listening, if you are giving that feedback or receiving that feedback, get specific. And in other industries, there might be other language, not executive presence, that is coded for you don't look the type, you don't act the type, you don't sound the type. Be specific, get examples. That creates a level of accountability that I think is super important.
Yeah, that is so critical. And I love that was an amazing description of what is executive presence, what does that mean, what's underlying it, and then those really tangible traits that you could say okay, yes, communication and how you interact with your team, those types of things. That's something that people can focus on. But executive
consistency thing that we were just talking about, consistency, right?
So this has been an amazing discussion. I have 2 more questions for you that I love to ask everyone on the podcast. So first, I will ask you, have you read any leadership books that you have found to be particularly impactful or influential for you?
I will say that I am a giant fan of Adam Grant, and so for those of your listeners who are not in business, he might not have hit your radar, but he has a few amazing books. Think Again is probably my favorite. Hidden Potential is also amazing. So He is my absolute favorite on leadership, and I would encourage those of you who have not read his books to read one of his books.
That is great. Thank you so much. No, I have not personally read either of those. I'm adding it to my list, my list of leadership books
He's
that
fabulous.
I want to attack. Yeah, I have to check that out. So thank you. And then
he also has a great podcast. So if you don't have time to read, he's got a great podcast on leadership that's also a good listen.
Yeah, it's work life. Everybody listening, hopefully you guys are all loving podcasts, right? So check that out for sure. And then last question for you is, do you have a favorite quote?
Oh, so we've talked about how you do anything is how you do everything. I have, so another one of my favorite quotes is, success comes from those that are too busy to be looking for it. So I deeply believe that it gets a little bit to my opening point about focus on the here and now. I really do think that is true. Okay, and then you asked for one, but now I'm going to do another, which is that chance favors the prepared mind. We think so much that, you or I are lucky, and we are incredibly lucky to be in the positions that we're in. But we also did a lot of hard work to be open to that incredible luck when it came along. So that I will close on that front of chance favors the prepared mind.
Yeah, that is fantastic and so true. I love that. So Janet, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It has been fantastic to hear about your experience at Deloitte and for you to share a lot of your very important leadership lessons that are highlighted in the book Arrive and Thrive. Honestly, the book is fantastic. I encourage everyone listening to read it, check it out. There's so much valuable information regardless of what field you're in. Janet, I really hope that we get to cross paths again sometime soon. And thank you for all that you're doing to support women in leadership.
I appreciate you having me on to have this conversation, and I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of the conversations you have with such an interesting and wide variety of people about leadership. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.